Neil Schon doesn't have the kind of voice that makes audiences cry. He's not the face you see on magazine covers, and he doesn't walk into tearful reunions like Steve Perry. But for more than half a century, as everyone else has come and gone, Perry, Rowley, Smith, Valerie, then Kane, one man has remained on stage holding the same worn black guitar, playing each note as if it were the only way he knew how to breathe. Neil Schon. He is the founder of Journey, and ironically, the last one left in the very band he created. A stubborn figure, often misunderstood, called controlling, extravagant, even unable to let go. Yet he is also the one who kept Journey from collapsing through decades of storms. Behind the stage lights, Neal Schon's life has been anything but peaceful. 5 marriages, countless legal battles, friends turned into enemies, and nights when he could barely hear the sound of his own guitar. But despite the conflicts, despite the heartbreaks, Neil has never left Journey, and perhaps he never could. This story isn't just about a guitarist. It's the journey of a man caught between glory and solitude, between loyalty and obsession. And the lingering question remains, is Neil Schon keeping Journey alive or just trying to keep his own soul from dying? For Neil Schon, music was never just a career. It was the only thread connecting him to the world. And perhaps to understand why he held on to it so desperately, one must go back, far back, to when he was just a boy who couldn't find his place in it. Neil Joseph Schon was born in 1954 at Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, a place where the roar of jet engines was more familiar than a lullaby. His family wasn't wealthy, but it was filled with music. His father, Matthew Schon, was a jazz musician who played trumpet in swing bands. His mother, a classical singer with a soft, clear soprano voice. In that small home, music wasn't entertainment. It was discipline, a common language, something you had to understand if you wanted to be heard. From the moment he could barely read, Neil lived between 2 opposing worlds, his father's improvisational jazz and his mother's strict classical precision. Each left its mark on him, the freedom of jazz and the structure of classical music. When he was 4, the family moved to San Mateo, California, a quiet suburb where most kids only cared about baseball and picnics. But Neil was different. While others dreamed of being athletes or firefighters, he was obsessed with the sound of strings and the feel of wood beneath his fingers. His father handed him his first guitar when he was 10. No lessons, no manuals, no expectations, just a gift. But to Neil, it wasn't a toy. The guitar became alive, a friend, a refuge. He learned to listen instead of read notes, mimicking every sound from Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Santana, musicians he would one day meet in person. As a teenager, while most of his peers were busy growing up, Neil only grew deeper into music. Teachers called him difficult to fit in. Classmates thought he was weird. But Neil never tried to explain himself. He didn't care about being understood, only about playing. At school, he was invisible. At home, he felt out of place in a world ruled by music. His father understood that better than anyone. He didn't praise or lecture his son. He simply said a sentence that Neil would carry forever. Music will teach you everything. Those years shaped the man Neil Schon would become. Quiet, resilient, and convinced that the truest emotions must be spoken through sound. For him, music wasn't about performance, and it was about survival. And that silence, that world of just him and his guitar, would later become the fire that pushed him onto the stage with legends. And the very reason he never learned how to live outside the spotlight. In 1969, in Buckley, where the haze of marijuana, the beat of drums, and the philosophy of counterculture blended into the air, Carlos Santana heard an unfamiliar guitar tone coming from a music shop. It wasn't a performance, just a teenager testing an instrument, head bowed, lost in concentration. forgetting the world around him. But in those few brief minutes, Santana knew he had stumbled upon something rare, the kind of fire only those who have burned on stage can recognize in each other. No audition, no resume. Santana simply asked if the boy was willing to play with the band. Neil nodded. A few weeks later, he walked out of school without a goodbye, carrying a Gibson Les Paul and one conviction. His life had just found its direction. At 15, Neal Schon became a professional guitarist, standing beside Carlos Santana, one of the greatest players of the era. Their pairing was a two-way explosion. Santana played with spirituality, treating every note like a prayer. Neil was the kid who played from instinct, from the raw surge of youth. On the album Santana 3, 1971, their collision created a sound that was wild, yet sensual, where Neil's guitar sliced through the air like a streak of light, and Santana responded with solos soft as smoke tracks, like No One to Depend On and Batuka, were more than a meeting of two generations. They were a conversation between an old soul and a heart untouched by cynicism. The album climbed into Billboard's top 10, hailed as the pinnacle of Latin rock, and turned Neil Schon from an unknown kid into a name the music world suddenly had to pay attention to. Success came fast, and so did the cost. Santana, increasingly devoted to philosophy, meditation, and improvisational jazz, wanted the band to drift away from mainstream rock. Neil, on the other hand, believed in raw energy, in the direct emotional current between guitar and audience. When Caravanserai, 1972, came out, critics praised its boldness, but it marked the split of two paths. The album was beautiful, refined, but otherworldly, like a Buddhist scripture translated into sound. For a boy not yet 18, it no longer made his blood ignite. During shows, Neil grew quieter, his eyes drifting during 10-minute improvisations. He respected Santana, but he could no longer find himself in that music. And so, at the peak of the band's fame, Neil walked away, not in anger, not in regret. It was a clean break, an artist's instinct for survival. If you no longer believe in what you're playing, there's no reason to stay. When the door to Santana closed, Neal Schon was just 18. But instead of fear, he saw a beginning. Leaving a band that had become an icon, he didn't run toward safety. He chose to build his own world. In 1973, alongside his old friend Greg Rowley, Santana's former keyboardist, Neil founded Journey. They didn't want to imitate anyone, nor chase the market. Journey was born as a declaration. No limits, no center, only music as the star. In their early era, the band played progressive rock infused with jazz fusion, complex, technical, the kind of music people described as made for musicians more than the audience. On stage, Neil was a free spirit, long solos, riffs stacked on riffs, turning each concert into an improvised voyage. But that boldness led Journey into a commercial dead end. Their debut album, Journey, 1975, was loaded with technique, bass and keyboards layered in intricate patterns, but it lacked a soul that resonated with the public. Critics praised it, but sales lagged, and Columbia Records began to doubt. A year later, Look Into the Future, 1976, arrived with a heavier blues rock sound, yet it still failed to solve the problem. The third album, Next, 1977, carried a spark. Neil's playing had grown more emotional, more fiery, and the arrangements were tighter, but it still wasn't enough to touch mainstream hearts. Journey became a paradox. Talent, identity, a unique sound, but no audience. The label applied pressure. Tense meetings with Columbia became routine, and the message was brutally clear: produce a hit or lose the contract. Neil found himself standing between two roads: cling to artistic pride or evolve to save the band from oblivion. For Neil, the decision felt like cutting off a limb. Journey was his creation, born from his hunger for freedom. But he understood that without evolution, the band would die young, like so many gifted groups swallowed by a shifting rock landscape. So he chose the hardest path: compromise without surrender. He decided to find a voice capable of carrying Journey's music to the masses without sacrificing its soul, and that's when Steve Perry appeared. A tenor voice, clear, aching, with the sorrow of soul and the fire of rock. Perry wasn't just a singer. He was the key to Journey's rebirth. Both the label and Neil immediately knew this would change everything. From that moment, Journey's DNA transformed. Neil trimmed down the long, intricate solos and began writing around tighter melodies, focusing on mood and lyricism. A new balance emerged between technique and emotion, between passion and commercial power. Journey was no longer just a musician's band. They were about to become the flame of the mainstream. The arrival of Steve Perry was like a beam of light piercing into Journey's complex, technical world. His crystal-clear tenor voice merged with Neal Schon's layered guitar work to create a sound that was both fiery and deeply emotional, a sound that would soon be known as the Journey signature. From their very first rehearsals, Neil realized that Perry wasn't just a new singer. He was the missing soul of the band. In 1978, they released Infinity, the album that marked a turning point of no return. Neil kept his technical foundation intact, but structured everything more deliberately, allowing Perry's voice to soar like a breeze cutting through his electric strings. The opening track, Lights, gentle and romantic, pulled Journey out of its dry, progressive shell. Wheel in the Sky, built around Neil's riff, became iconic, powerful yet free-spirited, perfectly embodying the name Journey. Infinity outsold everything they had ever done before, paving the way for a golden era. A year later came Evolution, 1979, and true to its name, it was a genuine evolution. Neil Schon no longer tried to prove himself as a virtuoso. He began to play through feeling, through sustain, through notes that lingered in the listener's memory. The song, Lovin', Touchin', Squeezin', became Journey's first top 20 Billboard hit. A love song where Neil's guitar pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, warm, and quietly aching. This album not only secured Journey's place on the American rock map, but also proved that Neil had found the balance between artistry and accessibility, between his own free-spirited guitar and the commercial soul of Perry's voice. By 1980 came Departure, often seen as the peak of the early Perry era. At 26, Neal Schon's guitar reached a strange new maturity, thick, sharp, yet soulful. Any Way You Want It exploded across radio, fast, bold, and exuberant, just like Neil himself on stage. It wasn't just a feel-good love song, it was a declaration. Journey was ready to move from smoky clubs to stadiums. In those 3 years, Neal Schon was no longer the kid who dropped out to play guitar. He was the backbone of a band rewriting the golden chapter of American rock. Concerts stretched for hours, lights swept across arenas, and audiences sang every chorus. Amid that overwhelming sound, Neil stood at the edge of the stage, hair falling across his face, fingers plucking steady notes, saying nothing, yet making it clear. He was the heartbeat keeping the machine alive. But glory always comes with a price. As Journey entered its golden age, the seeds of tragedy had already been planted. Within the relationship between Neal Schon and Steve Perry, two souls bound by music but destined to collide like thunder on the same sky. When the spotlight reached its brightest, Journey entered a phase every band dreams of, and the moment cracks began to appear. In 1981, they released Escape, their 7th album and the brightest statement of their career. From the first piano notes of Don't Stop Believin', listeners could sense something beyond music, a collective faith, an anthem for Reagan-era America, for a working generation dreaming of freedom. With over 12 million copies sold, Escape became one of the best-selling rock albums of all time. Who's Crying Now dominated radio stations worldwide. Open Arms touched millions of hearts. But amid all the praise, Neal Schon began to fade from the very spotlight he had helped ignite. On stage, the crowd's eyes turned to Steve Perry, the man whose voice could slice through air, carrying all the band's emotion. Neal was still there, quietly ensuring every note was perfect, so that others could shine. The greater the success, the wider the distance between them. Perry, hailed as the Voice, began to take more control, from song choices and tour schedules to production decisions. He believed Journey needed to sound more refined and polished, while Neal wanted to preserve the raw, untamed edge of the guitar. Studio meetings turned into silent power struggles. Perry cut down long solos. Neal refused to let the band lose its rock soul. Despite the tension, they kept working together. In 1983 came Frontiers, more synth-driven, in tune with the rising MTV era. The album sold over 6 million copies and became a global phenomenon, with Separate Ways, worlds apart. Its riff, written by Neal, becoming an emblem of the 1980s, urgent, fierce, and electrifying. Yet behind the scenes, the band no longer spoke like friends. Perry recorded alone. Neal worked on his parts separately. Both felt shut out from something they had once shared. 3 years later, Raised on Radio, 1986, arrived, a commercial success scarred by emotional fractures. By then, Perry had nearly full control, firing Ross Valerie and Steve Smith, Neal's close friends, for creative differences. To Neal, it wasn't just a personnel decision. It was a betrayal. The band he once called family now felt like a corporation, ruled by the man behind the microphone. Their concerts still sold out, but the fire was gone. Both Perry and Neal were exhausted, their relationship stretched to breaking point. In 1987, after Perry's mother passed away, he withdrew from music indefinitely. No announcement, no farewell, just silence. And at the very height of fame, Journey simply disbanded. Neil Schon, the man who had built the empire, didn't walk away. While his bandmates chose rest, he kept playing, recording, touring, collaborating, desperately trying to keep Journey's flame alive, even if only as an ember. Yet the harder he tried, the lonelier he became. Surrounded by posters of Perry's face and songs remembered only for their vocals, Neal slowly turned into the gatekeeper of his own creation, the man who refused to let it die, but no longer knew whether he himself was still alive within it. After Journey went on hiatus, Neal Schon refused to let himself fade into silence. He stepped away from the familiar spotlight of Journey, but not from music. For Neal, creation was instinct, and silence was the most frightening thing of all. So, in the late 1980s, while most of his peers were either retiring or chasing the rising pop trends, Neal started over, alone. In 1989, he released his solo album, Late Night, a deeply personal work where he poured out everything he couldn't express within Journey. It wasn't meant to show off his technique, but rather to confess, to speak from the heart of a man who had lived through glory and loss. Tracks like Smoke of the Revolution and Softly revealed a more introspective, restless Neal Schon. His guitar no longer screamed for attention. It spoke softly, recounting his long journey. From the teenage prodigy beside Santana to the man who had survived Journey's storm of fame. Late Night was not a commercial record, but critics saw in it a rare honesty, something mainstream music of that era was losing. That same year, Neal set out on a new adventure, Alongside his old bandmate Jonathan Cain and drummer Dean Castronovo, he formed the supergroup Bad English. The name might have been tongue-in-cheek, but their music was dead serious. With John Waite as lead vocalist, Bad English quickly became one of the last big acts of the glam rock era before grunge swept the scene. Their debut album Bad English, 1989, was a massive success. The ballad When I See You Smile topped the Billboard Hot 100, earning the band platinum status and widespread praise. After years of standing behind Steve Perry's voice, Neal Schon finally stepped back into his rightful role, a guitarist leading the music, not just supporting it. In songs like Heaven is a Four-Letter Word and Best of What I Got, he unleashed all his energy. Sharp, powerful riffs layered over melodies full of warmth and restraint, like a man who had lived through too much to play only for show. 2 years later came Backlash, 1991. The sound was heavier, more mature, reflecting the shifting times. Grunge was rising from Seattle, and the long-haired rock bands were vanishing from radio. Backlash still had its moments. Straight to Your Heart, Time Stood Still, but fatigue was setting in. The members began drifting toward different paths, and Neal found himself, once again, in a familiar cycle, when art and ambition stopped moving in the same direction. When Bad English broke up, Neal Schon was back where he started, alone, with his guitar, still haunted by the same question. Was he playing to live, or living only to keep playing? After Bad English disbanded, Neal returned to where it all began, with Journey. By the mid-1990s, nostalgia was sweeping America. Bands from the 70s and 80s were reuniting, and Journey was no exception. In 1996, Neal joined Steve Perry, Jonathan Cain, Ross Valerie, and Steve Smith to record Trial by Fire, an album no one expected would mark such a miraculous rebirth. The sound of Trial by Fire was no longer as grand as Escape. It was deeper, slower, and more wistful, as if the band had aged and every note carried a memory. The song, When You Love a Woman, brought Journey back to the Billboard charts and earned a Grammy nomination for Best Pop Performance by a duo or group. Neal's guitar, gentle, warm, perfectly controlled, turned the song into a quiet confession, not from a man in love, but from one who had lost love and still refused to give up hope. But just as things seemed to be reborn, tragedy struck. Steve Perry suffered a serious hip injury that required surgery before the band could tour. He hesitated, afraid of the risk. Neal didn't want to wait. He believed Journey had slept too long, that fans shouldn't be kept waiting any longer. When Perry wasn't ready, Neal announced that Journey would continue touring without him. Professionally, it was understandable, but personally, it was a wound that would never heal between two men who had once created magic together. Perry left, this time for good. And from that moment, the two never reconciled. They began speaking through the press, each carrying his own bitterness. Perry felt betrayed. Neal felt abandoned. Journey survived, but its soul changed. What had once been a family became a performance machine, still running but no longer warm. Neal took charge of finding new singers. First came Steve Augeri, whose voice echoed Perry's and helped Journey tour through the early 2000s. Then Jeff Scott Soto, a short, fiery experiment that lacked emotional connection. Finally, in 2007, Neal discovered Arnel Pineda, a virtually unknown Filipino singer he found on YouTube. Arnel's voice stunned the world, as if Steve Perry had been reborn on the other side of the planet. Neal brought him into the band, and from there, Journey entered a new era, more global, more resilient, and yet more divided. Because no matter how talented Arnel was, fans split into two camps, Team Perry and Team Neal, One clung to the golden past, the other stood by the man who had kept the flame alive. Neal Schon didn't argue, he just kept playing, because that was the only thing he knew how to do. In the years that followed, Journey kept releasing albums. Arrival, 2001, carried a fresh energy while staying true to the band's spirit. Neal's guitar was smoother, less showy, more emotional. Generations, 2005, experimented with multiple lead vocals, as if Neal was searching for that old sense of band again. During this era, they were honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a recognition not only for Journey but for Neal himself, the one man who had never abandoned the road he chose, even if he had to walk it alone. With Revelation, 2008, Journey made a roaring comeback with Arnel Pineda, selling millions and touring the world. Eclipse, 2011, leaned into technical prowess. Neal unleashed wild solos reminiscent of his early days. Though it didn't produce major hits, the album proved Journey still breathed, still a band that evolved with every era. In 2013, Neal was inducted into the Oklahoma Music Hall of Fame, recognized as a true icon of American guitar. 4 years later, in 2017, Journey entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, closing nearly half a century of history, with Neal as the only remaining original member. Journey has sold over 100 million records worldwide, an achievement few bands can match. But to Neal Schon, those numbers were never the real reward, because every success came with a loss. When the music reached its peak, friendships fell apart. When the applause roared, he was the last one standing on stage. And in all that glory, Neal remained the same boy he once was, standing at the edge of the stage, playing each note as if it were the only way to say he was still alive. Amid all the tours, stage lights, and the roar of thousands of fans, Neal Schon carried within him an emptiness that no spotlight could ever fill. After Journey had gone through its storms of breakup, reunion, and rebirth, his personal life unfolded in rhythms just as turbulent. Behind that ever-blazing guitar was a man who had spent years searching for peace, and for the first time, he believed he had found it when he met Tina Austin. They met in the late 1970s, just as Journey was beginning to taste the sweetness of fame. Neal was in his early 20s then, living fast, playing fast, and hardly remembering what a day off meant. Dena, beautiful, alluring, and strong-willed, didn't belong to the world of the stage. She came to him not for the fame, but because she saw, behind all that light, a lonely man, far more fragile than people thought. They fell in love quickly, like so many youthful romances between an artist and a woman who truly listened. Those early days felt like a ballad come to life. Long nights backstage, Tina waiting for Neal to finish recording sessions, spontaneous flights just to steal a few hours together between tour stops. Neal once told friends that when he was with Tina, he felt like more than the guitarist of Journey. He felt like himself. They married when Neal was at his peak, and for a brief time, life seemed to find a rare moment of calm. They had a son together, a simple happiness in the chaotic world of rock. Neal adored his child, carrying the boy's photo in his tour case as a reminder of where he truly belonged. But fame is never a gift without a price. The more successful Journey became, the wider the distance grew between them. Neal lived in the whirlwind of endless shows, while Dena bore the weight of being mother, wife, and the woman standing outside the glow. Short phone calls, broken promises of "I'll be home soon," replaced by recording sessions, interviews, and flights. Neal loved his family, but he didn't know how to stay, because for him, music always won. The tension simmered quietly. Tina felt she was living with a man who only existed through his music, while Neil battled between duty and passion. The harder they tried, the farther apart they drifted. What had once been his pride, the long tours, became an unmeasurable distance. Dena tried joining him on tour, but the constant travel, hotels, and exhaustion wore her down. Eventually, they both understood. They were trying to hold on to something already out of reach. When the marriage ended, Neil didn't blame or explain. He simply returned to the studio, plugged in his guitar, and played until his hands went numb. His tone during those years, especially on Escape and Frontiers, carried a distinct melancholy, sorrowful but not defeated, lonely yet full of longing for life. In every solo, listeners could feel him whispering an apology he could never say aloud. After parting from Dena, Neil continued his musical journey, but to many, he was no longer the fiery young man of the 1970s. In his maturity, caught between glory and solitude, he began to understand that artists don't always lose love. Sometimes they're just carried too far away by their own music to find their way back. When his marriage to Dena Austin closed, Neil entered a quieter period. No scandals, no public romances. But like every artist who lives by emotion, he couldn't remain alone for long. Music kept him alive, but love reminded him he was still human. And in those years after heartbreak, he met Beth Buckley, the second woman in his life. Gentler this time, yet leaving a deeper scar. Beth wasn't from the entertainment world. She was calm, grounded, the opposite of the feverish life Neil lived. When they met, Neil was emerging from the fog of post-divorce exhaustion, and Beth brought him something he thought he'd lost: stillness. Not the blinding lights or screaming crowds, but quiet evenings where two people could sit together, say nothing, and just listen to the sound of his guitar echo through the room. Their love unfolded slowly, unlike his first marriage. Neil had learned to fear pain, and Beth was wise enough not to try to change him. She let him be himself, a man who lived for music, while offering the comfort of a home that felt real. That made Neil believe things might be different this time. They married, built a small family, and for a while, it seemed he had found that delicate balance between the stage and real life. But for Neal Schon, peace never lasted long. When Journey reunited in the early 1990s, he was pulled back into the same relentless cycle: studios, tours, interviews, endless flights. Beth tried to keep their home grounded, but Neil carried the restlessness of someone who couldn't stop. He feared stillness because to him, stillness meant the end. Small differences slowly turned into wide gaps. Beth wanted stability. Neil kept chasing unfinished dreams. She waited for him to come home while he waited for inspiration to return. Every artist's marriage faces that test, and they were no exception. Long tours, nights when Beth stopped calling, the familiar cycle replayed: love, distance, silence, collapse. When his second marriage ended, Neil was no longer the defiant young man he once was. He endured it quietly, no drama, no blame. But the pain seeped into his music. If one listens closely to his guitar on Trial by Fire and Arrival, it's different, deeper, more somber, always pausing on a single quiet note at the end of a solo, as if he were stopping mid-thought because of memory. Beth Buckley left his life quietly, no fights, no headlines, only a silence that made the man who once made the world scream suddenly seem terrifyingly still. From then on, Neal Schon withdrew deeper into music, both as a refuge and as the only way left to tell the world that even when love leaves, he remains, guitar in hand. As if the moment he stops playing, he might disappear from his own life. After his marriage to Beth Buckley ended, Neal Schon entered one of the emptiest periods of his life. The fame, the money, the tours. They all continued, but he no longer felt like he belonged anywhere. It was during this time, as Neal tried to rediscover real emotion amid the repetition of endless shows, that he met Dena Gioelli, the woman who made him believe that perhaps there was still room for love in a life that had grown numb. Dena came into Neal's life when he was no longer the dreamy young man of the 1970s, but a seasoned, weary man wary of anything that might break his heart again. She was unlike the women who came before her, not dazzled by the fame of Journey, not chasing the image of a rock star, but drawn instead to the man behind the guitar, the one who hid his fragility behind his music. With Dena, Neal was allowed to be weak, to be Neal, not the guitar legend. Their love began quietly, but was full of passion. Dena stood by Neal through some of his most difficult professional years, when Journey reunited, when old members left, and when he faced harsh criticism for continuing to tour without Steve Perry. She never interfered, never demanded, she simply stayed, quietly behind him, the one person who could make him lower the shoulders he always held tense. They married in the early 2000s, when Neal was throwing himself into keeping Journey alive. At first, married life was peaceful, but gradually the same pressure of the spotlight began to wear away at them. Neal was on tour nearly all year, while Dena carried the weight of home alone. The long separations meant they rarely spent more than a few weeks together, and when they did, the emotional distance felt even greater. Neal loved his wife, but he didn't know how to stay still. The artist in him always needed movement, creation, and sometimes escape. Dena, on the other hand, longed for a real home, not a hotel room, not a studio. The conflicts began with small things: a missed call, a tour that ran longer than expected, an interview where Neal forgot to mention her. Little things, but for a woman trying to hold a family together, they became tiny cuts that deepened over time. As their love began to lose rhythm, Neal returned to the one thing he could always count on: music. In the recordings of Generations, 2005, and Revelation, 2008, one could hear loneliness slip into every note. Though never spoken publicly, many fans believed that this was the period when his marriage to Dena Gioelli was falling apart, and that sorrow became the soul of his guitar. The marriage ended quietly. No fights, no lawsuits, just two people realizing they had gone too far to turn back. For Neal, it was more than a breakup. It was the third time he had to face the truth that the man who could make millions cheer could never manage to keep one home together. When Dena left, Neal went back to his guitar, as he always did. In an old interview, he once admitted that playing was the only way not to hear my heart breaking. And indeed, since then, his guitar tone carried a deeper, darker note. The sound of someone who had loved deeply but couldn't hold on to what he loved. After his marriage to Dena Gioelli ended, Neal entered a phase where he seemed cold to everything outside music. He buried himself in touring, recording, and keeping Journey alive through turbulent times. But no one can live forever on applause alone. When the lights dimmed and the crowd's noise faded, he once again faced the same void, the space where music could not replace the feeling of someone waiting for him to come home. And in that loneliness, he met Kosanne, the woman who made him believe once again that perhaps his heart could finally rest. Amber entered Neal's life when he was a man who had already survived 3 failed marriages. She was younger, gentle, and unlike anyone before her. Amber wasn't drawn to fame. She came to Neal with sincerity and genuine admiration for the artist who had endured so much loss, yet still carried light in his eyes. Neal, used to turbulence and heartbreak, found something rare in Amber. peace. They married in the early 2000s in a quiet ceremony, away from the press. Neil was entering middle age, and Amber felt like a breeze of calm, helping him rediscover a sense of family after years spent between stages and studios. They had children together, and for Neil, that was a happiness he had lost too many times before. To friends, this was the most grounded version of Neal Schon, still passionate, still creative, but finally, learning to pause, to love, and to be a father. Yet, even a peaceful beginning couldn't escape the familiar whirlwind of an artist's life. Neil was still a man of flights, sound checks, and endless nights under stage lights. Amber, who had once believed she could balance the artist and the man, began to realize Neil didn't belong to the quiet world she came from. As Journey found renewed global success with new singers, Neil spent more and more time away from home. Short calls and brief reunions became the rhythm of their marriage. Eventually, patience has its limits. Neil, though loving his wife and children, didn't know how to stop. He was obsessed with keeping Journey alive, seeing it as his life's mission. Amber, meanwhile, grew weary of feeling like a footnote in someone else's legend. They drifted apart, not through betrayal, but because their lives no longer moved to the same beat. The marriage ended silently, no shouting, no bitterness, just two people who had loved deeply, now standing on opposite sides of a stage that never closed. Neil poured that sorrow into his music. In Revelation 2008 and Eclipse 2011, his guitar sounded richer, more emotional, like the voice of a man who had touched happiness, but could never hold it. At an age when most people settled down, Neil kept touring, carrying his guitar like a talisman. Yet deep inside, he knew. With every marriage that ended, he lost a part of himself. And while music could fill arenas, it never filled the emptiness inside his heart. Amber Kosanne left his life quietly. No drama, no bitterness. But that very silence hurt the most. Because sometimes what haunts us isn't the argument or the anger. It's the sound of someone walking away, leaving behind only one thing still echoing in the air: the lonely, lingering notes of his guitar. After years of broken marriages, Neil Schon thought he had closed the door to his heart for good. At 50, he no longer believed love could ever return to his life, until Micha Salahi appeared. What seemed at first like a fleeting encounter became the most unexpected, turbulent, and emotional chapter in the life of a man who had long stopped believing in happiness. When they reconnected, Micha was no stranger to American media. She had been a controversial figure on The Real Housewives of D.C., and, along with her former husband, Tarek Salahi, had been at the center of the infamous 2009 White House gate-crashing scandal, one of the most talked-about incidents in the country at the time. Neil and Micha had actually met decades earlier, in the 1990s, when she was a Journey fan and had met him backstage after a show. But it wasn't until nearly 20 years later, when both were emerging from personal heartbreaks, that they truly found each other. In 2011, while the media still labeled her the scandal queen, Micha suddenly disappeared from her home. Her husband at the time reported her missing, claiming she had been kidnapped. But a few days later, the truth shocked America. Micha hadn't been kidnapped. She was with Neil Schon. The media erupted. Their pictures were everywhere, and Neil instantly became a lightning rod for criticism. He was accused of breaking up a marriage and of orchestrating a publicity stunt and of chasing a tabloid romance that would burn out as quickly as it began. But against all expectations, Neil and Michaela's love wasn't impulsive. They came together at a time when both were too tired to pretend anymore. Michael, After years of living under the glare of fame and scandal, found in Neal something she hadn't known in years: sincerity and peace. And Neal, a man who had endured countless heartbreaks, saw in her what none of his past loves had. A connection born not of reason, but of shared wounds. Their relationship began in the eye of the storm, but Neal refused to hide. He openly defended the woman he loved, brought her on tour, appeared with her at events, and didn't hesitate to say, "I finally found someone who makes me want to slow down." In 2013, they were married at San Francisco's Palace of Fine Arts, a lavish ceremony broadcast live on pay-per-view, where Neal performed a ballad he had written especially for Micha. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration that this love, once mocked by the world, was real to its core. As Neal's wife, Micha became an inseparable part of his life. She accompanied him on journey tours across the world, always sitting in the front row, holding his hand as he came off stage. Fans who had once doubted her began to see things differently. Neal looked happier, more open, and more at peace. And Micha, after years of being defined by scandal, was finally seen as a woman simply and genuinely happy. Their love wasn't without challenges. The press still pried, social media still sneered. But both of them understood that noise too well. Neal and Micha chose to live quietly amid the chaos, posting photos together, sharing small, ordinary moments, and appearing side by side as a couple still savoring every day, regardless of age or past. If the women before her had inspired Neal Shon's sad songs, Michaele Salahi brought him his warmest final chapter. At 60, he was no longer the young guitarist chasing endless night tours, but a man who could finally pause after a show, look down at the front row, see his wife smiling back at him, and realize that after decades of playing for millions, he now only needed to play for one. When the world thought Neal Schon had finally found peace, in music, in love, and within himself, a new storm rose. This time, it wasn't born of passion or emotion, but of colder forces: politics, money, and pride. In 2020, as America sank into deep division, Jonathan Cain, Neal's longtime bandmate, friend, and Journey's iconic keyboardist, brought "Don't Stop Believin'" to events supporting Donald Trump. That song, once a timeless symbol of unity and hope, now echoed among political banners and campaign slogans. For Neal, who had always believed Journey should remain above politics, it felt as if their legacy had been dragged into a war he never chose. He spoke out publicly, urging, "Keep the music pure. Don't turn it into a weapon." But that statement cracked open a wound long festering between the two men. Old resentments over money, control, and the direction of the band erupted into open conflict. Cain accused Neal of misusing the band's credit card for personal expenses. Neal countered that Cain had privatized Journey, controlling group finances in secret. From 2022 to 2023, the two, once brothers in arms through Escape and Frontiers, dragged each other into court. Receipts, contracts, private messages, all laid bare for the public to dissect. The media called it a divorce inside a band that broke up long ago. Journey, once the embodiment of faith and belief, had become a mirror of everything fame could destroy: loyalty, friendship, and the beauty that once united millions of fans. As the feud raged, another familiar name returned: Steve Perry. After years of silence, Journey's legendary frontman filed a lawsuit over ownership of the group's classic trademarks, including "Don't Stop Believin'," "Any Way You Want It," and "Wheel in the Sky." The former singer, once seen as part of Journey's past, now stood against his old bandmates in one of the most tangled legal battles in the group's history. Journey had become a three-way battleground. Neal Schon, defending creative control and legacy, Jonathan Cain defending dignity and finances, and Steve Perry fighting to reclaim his piece of history. By 2024, the tension reached its peak. Their anniversary tour was partially canceled due to unresolved lawsuits. The arenas that should have been glowing with songs of hope now stood silent. That same silence Neil had always feared most. For over half a century, Neil Schon has not only been the founder, but the unyielding spirit of Journey, a band whose name has transcended music to become part of American culture. In a world where most bands crumble under ego, money, and time, Neil still stands, not as a star, but as the guardian of a flame. From his first notes on Santana 3rd to the eternal echo of Don't Stop Believin', from the blinding lights of 1980s stadiums to nostalgic tours in 2024, his story is not just about an artist. It's about loyalty to music, to a dream, to oneself. Neil Schon was never the loudest guitarist, nor the most technically dazzling. He is the heartbeat behind it all, the man who built the foundation of feeling for millions, without needing to be named. His legacy lies in endurance, in how he carved time into melody, in how he kept Journey alive through every fracture, and in how his guitar still reminds people of something simple yet eternal. That music, when played from the heart, never dies. Songs like Lights, Faithfully in Separate Ways don't just belong to the 1980s. They live on through new generations, in films, graduations, and every moment when someone needs hope to keep going. Now, at 70, he still hasn't stopped. Though he suffers from chronic tinnitus and sometimes can't fully hear his own guitar, Neil continues to walk on stage night after night. His familiar Les Paul hangs from his shoulder, his eyes close, and the sound rises, raw, cracked, but alive. Arnel Pineda, Journey's current vocalist, once said bitterly that he's only called when needed to sing. Whether intended or not, that line captured the truth. Journey is no longer just a band. It's a brand, a vessel, a legacy that Neil Schon holds together with the rest of his life. And night after night, Neil still stands there, under the flood of lights, silver hair brushing his shoulders, eyes calm yet defiant. He no longer plays for fame or applause. He plays because it's the last thread connecting him to everything he's ever loved. The people who left, the dreams that faded, the music that never did. Journey endures. But now only one man remains. Neil Schon, the final guardian of a legend. A man who keeps its legacy not through glory, but through solitude. So, if you've ever sung along to Don't Stop Believin' and felt a lump in your throat without knowing why, remember the man who wrote it with his entire life. Neil Schon, the one who never abandoned music, even when music seemed to abandon everything else. If his story moved you, share this video so more people can know the journey behind Journey. And if you still believe in the power of a song to heal, leave a comment. Love Neil Schon, as a tribute to the man who never stopped believing.